And now we move on from the PS2 era to the PS3 and Xbox 360 generation as we look into the next game in the Devil May Cry series. That is to say, we're going to look at what is currently the most recent game in the original Devil May Cry series and the first Devil May Cry game to be released in the HD consoles, which is to say Devil May Cry 4. And note that I say original series. Anyway, in contrast to Devil May Cry 3, 4 seems to be more mixed in the community. Granted, it's looked on as a good game in the series nowadays, though it did seem to have a negative connotation to it near its launch. Well, from what I've heard. Anyway, it does seem that the consensus on Devil May Cry 4 is that while it is a really good action game that's fun to play, it does have some disappointing factors in it that can sour the experience, at least for longtime fans of the Devil May Cry series. But is that consensus true? Well, that's what this video is here to discuss. Hello, I am Peter47890/Sirus, and welcome to part 4 of my Devil May Cry reviews, a series of videos where I will be looking into the various games that belong to the Devil May Cry franchise and see how they hold up as action games. And today, we'll be looking at the aforementioned Devil May Cry 4. So, without further ado, let's rock!
Fair play, pal. And it's beginning to piss me off. We must evacuate the residents back to headquarters. Report back as soon as you can. And be careful. I got it already. Though a fight every now and then does make life a little more interesting. So, you're looking to play, huh? Alright, I guess I got some time to kill. Tough guy, huh? Well...
Now visually, I have to say for a game that was first released at around 2008, the visual still holds up pretty well today. From the variety of environments that we'd be traversing, from thick forests to gothic-like castles, to the various character and enemy models, Devil May Cry 4 is a pretty game to look at. The animation is also top-notch, with the in-game cinematography that we see in the various cutscenes being as good as Devil May Cry 3, with the various over-the-top fight scenes we see in the game, with them just being a lot of fun to watch, as is the scenes where Dante gets a new weapon. The in-game animation is also great, with the game being buttery smooth when you are playing through the game. And I have to say that Devil May Cry 4, despite being a 6-year-old game, still did impress me in the visual department, despite having played more recent games. The sound design in Devil May Cry 4 is also pretty strong too. The music is par the course for a Devil May Cry game, which is to say that the music is pretty good, with there being exciting heavy metal tracks that will pump you up during the fights, from the normal standard fights to the boss fights in the game, to the more soft sounding orchestral tracks that really does fit the more dramatic scenes that are in the game. I especially like the opera-esque track that we see in the game's opening when you first start the first mission, though I really do like that opening overall. The voice acting is also top-notch, with the voice actors really doing a good job at portraying the characters in the game, from Jean-Yong Bosch playing our smart-ass hot-blooded protagonist Nero, to Ruben Lagans reprising his role as the laid-back and cocky Dante. Everyone does a really good job of the characters in the game, and it does look like that the voice actor in the game were having a lot of fun with the script in the game, especially this scene.
And your judgments interest me not. For I'm here to reclaim what is rightfully mine.
That is what you seek. And that is why I wait in your power!
You will fumble for a position.
Okay, now let's talk about the story. Story-wise, the game put us in the shoe of Nero, the new protagonist of Devil May Cry 4, who's basically affiliated with a religious group who worships Sparta, the demon that turned against his own kind in order to defend humanity and was successful in his endeavor 2,000 years ago, and this group basically worships Sparta as a deity. The story starts out with Dante swooping in and killing the Pope, while everyone was praying to Sparta, with Nero now having to stop him. I know I should be surprised, but this type of scenario does seem vaguely familiar. I can't put my finger on it, but a scenario where our Red Cloth protagonist, who is the hero from past games, is now appearing as an antagonistic figure at the start, with the main protagonist in this game is now opposing him, who is voiced by Johnny Young Bosch. Seems so familiar. Well, I got nothing. Anyway, the story from there is basically Nero tracking down Dante, with him running into some unforeseen circumstances along the way, as well as fighting through the hordes of demons that now infest Fortuna Island. Now, I have heard that Devil May Cry fans have said that the story of Devil May Cry 4 is filler, and I can see where they're coming from, since when you get down to it, the story doesn't really expand much of the lore in the Devil May Cry series, and that does come off as wasted potential, since in the story of this game, there is an actual religion based around Sparta, so it would have been great to hear about Sparta regarding the various myths pertaining to him. And really, I think lack of detail is one of my gripes of Devil May Cry 4 story. Not so much pertaining to Sparta or even learning more about Dante, but to Nero. Because by the end of the story, there are several unexplained questions about Nero's origin. But despite those issues, I still enjoy the story to Devil May Cry 4. And that's really got to do with the characters. Nero is a fun and likable character, especially with his smart aleck remark against the various bosses in the game, and the game does explain his motivation well enough and was relatable that I was invested in Nero as a character to go through the story. Dante is also just a bucket of fun whenever he appears on screen, with his laid-back devil-may-care attitude and witty remarks against the various characters in the game, but he is still able to display at times the serious and compassionate side we saw in Devil May Cry 1 Dante, but is done in a way that works thanks to the script and Ruben Lagon's portrayal of the character. So overall, I still enjoy the story in Devil May Cry 4. Does it have its weak points? Yeah, but I was still invested in it. Now we get to what is perhaps the most important component to a Devil May Cry game, namely the gameplay. Now, part of course of how I do almost all of my reviews on action games, I'll be discussing the structure of the game itself, the combat, and various other extras. Now structurally, the game works like the other Devil May Cry games, with Devil May Cry 4 having you go through linear levels as you fight the horde of demons that stand in your way, as well as getting you to do some slight adventuring / puzzle / platforming aspects, with you fighting the occasional boss, and when you complete the level, you'll be rewarded a rank that is based on how well you did, with you getting more red orbs and proud souls the higher rank you get, which are both the currency of the game, respectively. The game also gets you to play as both Nero and Dante, with you playing some stages as Nero and the other stages as Dante. Now structurally, it got good parts and bad parts. The good parts is that the level you'll be going through is spacious enough to accommodate the fast-paced hack-and-slash gameplay that Devil May Cry 4 embodies, and why the levels are definitely bigger and longer than Devil May Cry 3 and 1. I still think the levels themselves aren't too big that slows down the pacing of the gameplay. The balance between the adventuring aspects and battle is also done well, with there being a steady amount of battles you'll be fighting throughout the levels, which is great, but also enough downtime between the battles with the adventuring slash puzzle slash platforming aspects that you don't feel too overwhelmed when you're going through each level. I also like some of the platforming done with Nero's Devil Buster, which also provide a fun distraction as you are going through the levels. They also do a good job of slowly introducing the various enemy types to you as you progress the game. But alas, there is some aspects to Devil May Cry 4 structure that is less than ideal. One such aspect is one type of puzzle the game brings, which is the dice section. Oh god, I hate this section. This section can either be a breeze or a pain in the ass, depending on the dice roll you get, and I'm not kidding. During one of my playthroughs, I used up 4 dice rolls during the dice section and ended up exactly where I was at the start. And it wouldn't be so bad if this appeared once, but nope! The dice puzzle reared its ugly head during mission 19, which is the boss rush stage, and not only is it back, it's in overdrive. And really, this dice section would have driven me crazy on my Dante Must Die run during mission 19 if I didn't discover a trick to manipulate the dice, which is to say that if you use a Devil Buster on the dice, the number that appears on the top of the dice as you buster it will be the number you roll. But still, even with that trick, I still think the dice section is just really annoying to go through, and I didn't really have any fun with that section, even knowing the trick. But the dice section isn't the only thing going against Devil May Cry 4 in terms of structure. The other problem to the structure is when you get to the halfway point to the game, you basically have to replay the stages you've previously been to in a reverse order, which really screams lazy, and I could see why people do call Devil May Cry 4 an unfinished game because of the reuse of levels. I mean, at first I was optimistic and thought people were exaggerating. I mean, what kind of company would be okay with releasing an unfinished game and selling it for full price? Well, got me there. But seriously speaking, having played the game through not only on the Devil Hunter difficulty but also Son of Sparta and Dante Must Die, I can really see how Devil May Cry 4 can really be called an unfinished game. It also doesn't help that you also have to fight the same bosses a second time when you're going through the levels in the reverse order, and also fight those same bosses a third time in the boss rush in mission 19. Albeit the repeated level is not a carbon copy in terms of how you progress through the same area and some enemy types being introduced, but the rehash displayed by the game can be really ridiculous, and thus strengthening the argument that Devil May Cry 4 is unfinished. Now let's get to the aspect that is pretty much the key factor to a Devil May Cry game, the combat. Now, Devil May Cry 4 plays like a fast-paced hack-and-slash game, but it does mixes up the combat a bit by letting us play as 2 different characters, which are respectively Nero and Dante. I'll first explain how Nero plays like. Nero basically has 3 forms of attacks, which are basically his custom sword that he uses, the Red Queen, which I have to add is a pretty unique weapon on its own, his double-barrel revolver, the Blue Rose, and his arm, which is the Devil Buster. With the Red Queen, Nero got a variety of moves that he's able to pull off with his custom sword, but alongside those moves, he is also able to rev up the Red Queen, which is the equivalent of charging it, and if you charge it to a certain extent, the standard attack do become stronger, and if you use certain attacks when it is charged, such as Streak, Shuffle, or Split, the attack animation of those attacks will extend and cause great amount of damage to any enemy laying in its path. That and the Red Queen will be enveloped in flame when you do those certain attacks, which is awesome to witness. The Blue Rose is Nero's main form of ranged attack, with him being able to rapidly fire into the various foes with it. But alongside that, he is also able to charge the blue rolls, which will cause more damage as well as stunning them. Now, Nero's Devil Bringer is probably one of the more unique concepts in Devil May Cry 4. As with the Devil Bringer, Nero is able to perform a variety of throws on the numerous enemies that he faces, which will cause a significant amount of damage. And this is not only limited to normal foes, but also bosses when they are stunned. And along with throws, he's able to perform the Snatch ability, which will allow him to bring enemies closer to him, or bring him closer to enemies. And the last of Nero's offensive capabilities is probably his Devil Trigger that he gets when he obtains Yamato later on in the game. Now, Nero's Devil Trigger is pretty different from Dante, though you still need enough Devil Trigger meter to activate it. When he activates it, an apparition will appear over Nero and will basically mimic Nero's moves. So an attack that usually creates a 6 or 7 hit combo like Hero Combo C will turn into a 12 or 14 hit combo. Nero grab animation will also extend if he is in Devil Trigger, which will cause more damage than usual. Nero also have the ability to slowly regen his health while in Devil Trigger, but do note that Nero can still be stunned normally even in Devil Trigger mode. Nero also have the ability to summon flying blades while he's in Devil Trigger mode, and you basically do this by pressing the shoot button, and Nero can basically summon these flying blades indefinitely, with him being able to summon these flying blades even while he's in an attack or grab animation. And if used in conjecture with a grab animation, the flying blades can deal a good amount of damage to enemies. Nero also got some specific moves that he's able to perform while in Devil Trigger mode. Now let's move on to how Dante plays like. He played most similarly like he did in Devil May Cry 3, with Dante having a variety of moves he can do with a variety of weapons he gets from his iconic Rebellion to other various melee weapons he gets later on in the game, as well as getting around 3 different firearms in his arsenal, with each weapon being really distinct from each other. Dante also retained his ability to instantaneously switch between his melee weapons and firearms on the fly, but rather than selecting 2 melee weapons and 2 firearms at the start of a level like in the 3rd game, he has the ability to switch between all 3 melee weapons and 3 firearms, which will allow him to use the variety of moves that each weapon brings to the table in any given situation in battle. The style system also makes a return, with Dante getting special exclusive abilities that he can use, which is dependent on the style that he equips at the time, such as equipping the Swordmaster style will enable him to use the additional moves for each melee weapon that Dante has under his disposal, or equipping the Royal Guard style will allow Dante to be able to guard and use his counterattack when he guards against an enemy too, which is pretty damaging. But rather than Dante having 6 individual styles like in the 3rd game, in this game he has 5, which are namely Trickster, Swordmaster, Royal Guard, Gunslinger, and Dark Slayer, which he gets later on in the game. But the neat addition that Devil May Cry 4 brings to the table is that Dante is able to instantaneously switch between the various styles on the fly. The various styles is also upgradable like from 3, well the first 4 styles, but rather than being upgraded by fighting enemies, it is upgraded by purchasing upgrades by using the Proud Souls mechanic, and I'll explain that in a bit. Dante also got his signature Devil Trigger, with him being able to activate it if he has enough Devil Trigger meter, and he gets the usual benefit he usually gets when he's in Devil Trigger that you expect, which are namely that he gets stronger, gets a bit faster, being able to withstand more attacks without being stunned, being able, his defense being a bit higher as well, and the neat addition is that some of his attacks get extended if he is in Devil Trigger mode. Okay, alongside describing how both characters plays like, I'll explain the general combat related stuff that is in Devil May Cry 4. The style meter is still in the game and works like it did with 3, with the style meter going up if you're able to get a good offensive on the various enemies you'll be fighting, as well as mixing up your attacks and of course not getting hit. And the higher style ranking you get, the more red orbs you're able to get from your defeated enemies, as well as getting a high stylish point, which will improve your ranking at the end of the level, which in turn will allow you to earn more Proud Souls. And speaking about red orbs and proud souls, I explained the progression and upgrading system in the game. Now, red orbs in the past games was the currency that you used to buy item and upgrades. Devil May Cry 4 is a bit different in this regards, with red orbs being mainly used for purchasing items, with proud souls, which we get at the end of a level, and the amount of proud souls you get is dependent on the ranking you get, is used for buying your upgrades in this game. Overall, I have to say that the combat in Devil May Cry 4 is just amazingly fun. The combat's fast-paced, exhilarating, and the controls for Devil May Cry 4 is just as tight as the previous games. Well, namely 1 and 3, because we all know that 2 control like shit. But anyway, Nero and Dante controls wonderfully. The duo is also a lot of fun to play as, while also being really distinct from each other. Nero, while not being as complex to play as Dante, is still a lot of fun, with him still having a good amount of moves he can do with the Red Queen, with most of his moves being useful to do, which does give you a good amount of moves to play around with and form combos with. And the charge mechanic that revolves around both the Red Queen and Blue Rose is very satisfying to use, with how much havoc you can deal to enemies in terms of utilizing the charge mechanic to its fullest, especially later on in the game when you're able to charge all the EX meter with a well-timed button press with an ability you can purchase. The Devil Bringer is also really satisfying to do in terms of the throw attacks you're able to perform to the enemy. They're really awesome to witness, and you really do feel empowered whenever you use a throw, especially during a boss fight. And I never really did felt the throw attacks ever got old as well, as Nero does perform a different type of throws depending on the enemy types. And Nero is still susceptible to an attack when he does a throw, so you still need to be careful when to do throws. Dante himself is just awesome to play as. Dante combo potential is just immense, with him not only being able to instantaneously switch between all his melee weapons and his firearms in the game, which will give you a great amount of moves to play around with each weapon being really distinct from each other, having a different play style to them, which will allow much creativity in how you want to form combos during battle. But also with the different styles they can switch on the fly, which opens up Dante's moveset during combat hugely, with him gaining the offensive capabilities that both Swordmaster and Gunslinger brings to the table. In terms of the additional moves he's able to use with his melee weapons and firearms, but also gaining the defensive capabilities that Trickster and Royal Guard bring to the table. And to add, I do think that Dante only having 3 melee weapons and 3 firearms to switch between is a good balance in terms of giving great combo variety to Dante and also making weapon switching fluid, as I think having more weapons would make the weapon switching a bit encumbering, well, for instantaneous weapon switching. And Dante overall is just a blast to play with in regards to the vast amount of options that he has under his disposal during combat, from his arsenal of unique melee weapons and firearms that are distinct from each other, as well as being satisfying to use, to the various styles that he's able to utilize during battle. The enemy variety is also one more thing I have to compliment Devil May Cry 4, as the enemy variety in this game is simply awesome. Now, they did reuse some of Devil May Cry 1 enemies such as the Frost and Blades, where the Blades is now called Assaults, but at least they added the good enemies that are fun to fight, and I do really like the enemy variety, with each enemy type requiring you to mix up how you go into a fight, which does make fighting the various enemies in the game to be pretty fun and interesting, and the bosses themselves are also pretty fun to fight as well. Now, some of them don't measure up to some of the more fun bosses in Devil May Cry 1 and 3, but at least all of them are still fun to fight against, and there are a few bosses that measure up to the best of the best in the series in terms of bosses. The stylish meter also feels rewarding to utilize in terms of the red orbs you get from defeating enemies with a high stylish ranking via keeping a good offensive, mixing up the various moves you'll be doing, as well as not getting hit. And the stylish meter also feels rewarding for the proud souls you get, with the stylish points you build up for consistently getting a good stylish ranking for defeating the various enemies. The progression system via the Proud Souls is also a well done system, as I do feel that there is a strong feeling of progression, with there being lots of upgrades you can get in terms of purchasing moves and abilities, with you do really feeling that you do get stronger when you purchase these abilities, and I never really did felt any of the abilities felt useless. I also do think it's neat how purchasing an upgrade will make the other abilities more expensive, as that does encourage you to think which ability would be more worth it to buy in the long run. So yeah, as you can see, despite being an unfinished game, I still find Devil May Cry 4 to be tons of fun. But of course, there are still some negative bullet points we have to go through in terms of the combat. Firstly is the obvious, the reuse of bosses. Yeah, they may be fun to fight against, but having to fight against them 3 times, with the bosses themselves not really changing all that significantly, can be a drag and make the experience feel a bit samey. It's not as bad as it could be though, since when you're fighting them the second time, you do play as Dante, who does really play differently from Nero, but the reuse of bosses is still disappointing. A second minor complaint is probably that the camera can be a bit iffy at times when you're in tight corridors, but actually I find that most of the time the camera actually worked really well, which is why I say it was a minor complaint. One disappointing factor though, why not technically being a bad point, is that Devil May Cry 4 is not as challenging as Devil May Cry 1 and 3, with the game being pretty forgiving, especially in terms of rankings, with how items don't negatively affect your rankings, except for using the gold orbs, and how the criteria for the ranking in Devil May Cry 4 is much more lenient in comparison to Devil May Cry 1 and 3 in regards to getting a good ranking. Now let me get this out of the way. Devil May Cry 4 still give a fair challenge on the Devil Hunter difficulty, and the higher difficulty can still give a good challenge. I'm just saying it's not as tough as Devil May Cry 1 and 3. But despite its shortcomings, Devil May Cry 4 is still tons of fun to play. Now the last thing I will probably discuss is the difficulty levels. For the difficulty modes, there's basically Human, Devil Hunter, Son of Sparta, Dante Must Die mode, Heaven and Hell mode, and Hell and Hell mode. Human is basically easy, Devil Hunter, normal, and Son of Sparta being the hard mode of the game, with the game also changing enemy placements in Son of Sparta, as well as upping the aggressiveness of the enemies as well as the damage output. Dante Must Die is what you expect, with you also having to deal with the Devil Trigger enemies, though Devil May Cry 4 did add Devil Trigger to the bosses too, which can make the fights even more intense. Heaven and Hell mode is basically the same as it was in Devil May Cry 3, with everything in that mode dying in one hit. And Hell and Hell mode is pretty interesting, with you only being able to withstand 4 hits, with the various enemy types you find in the game being adjusted to basically Son of Sparta mode. Overall, Devil May Cry 4 is tons of fun to play as. Does it have its faults? Yeah, especially in the reuse of levels that does support the argument that it's incomplete, but even if it is, it's such a fun incomplete game. There's just tons of aspects to the game that makes it a blast to go through, with the stylish and fast-paced combat, with both Nero and Dante being tons of fun to play as, with each being really distinct for each other. The bosses in Devil May Cry 4 is also still fun to fight against, even though you do have to fight the majority of them around 3 times. And the story, while being filler, was still entertaining to me due to the likable characters, especially Dante, with him being at his absolute best in this game in terms of personality. And overall, why Devil May Cry 4 does have its flaws, and I can see why people can be disappointed with Devil May Cry 4, but those shortcomings, in my opinion, doesn't prevent the game from being a lot of fun, and that's enough for me.
We'll stand and fight together. Through our strength, we'll make a better
Well folks, I have reviewed all of the Devil May Cry games that was in the original series. But of course, since I have said that I would review every game in the franchise, so I guess I'm now obligated to give my thoughts on the Devil May Cry reboot that was released by Ninja Theory. So, ladies and gentlemen, join me next time in my channel where I'm going to talk about the very controversial Devil May Cry reboot. Enjoy.